Welcome to week 2 in Law and Legal Education. I wanted to address a question that I had this week. This course is not about education law. We are focused on an overview of the legal system for paralegals and future law students. So we're covering the topics that are typical to a law practice in almost any jurisdiction. These are just the most common things that different law practices will cover. So you can see here through week 1 through 8, the topics that are going to be covered. We started out with civil litigation, which is talking about a non-criminal activity, something between two parties, and how a law case would be structured and how there are formal procedures that govern that. This week we're moving on to sources of law. And then we're going to go into other types of common cases: torts, contracts, criminal law, administrative law, property law, and family law. So I just wanted to make sure you guys were on board with where we were in this course and what this class is going to be. Another question I had this week was about the signature assignment. It will be due in week 7, and for each of the topics that you choose to do, you have to pick 50 of these. You will write a paragraph about each one, citing to the material in the course. So there is an example here showing constitutional law. Every term should be bold and underlined. They should all be numbered. Every one of these should have an in-text citation to the course material, including a page number from where the information came that you're using in your response. So as you can see down through there are different types of topics. Some of these are big concepts like the federal rules of criminal procedure or the elements of a contract. Those are big topics. The constitutional interpretation in 3 examples, that's something that we're going to cover later on. It's in the textbook and it'll be in the course lectures. So those are big topics that you can cover easily in a paragraph. Now, other ones where I'm talking about a felony or probation, parole, or a jury, those are things to where you're going to look more in depth at why do we have juries in the United States? What is a jury trial? How is that important? How do we use a jury to make sure that our judicial system is working properly? This can be in a civil case or a criminal case. So it's not just to say that a jury is peers of the defendant. You need to go deeper than that. It's not just the textbook definition. You're going to define what a jury is. Then you'll go in and talk about why that is relevant, why we've had it throughout the history of our country. So I just want to give you a little bit more explanation of that. On things like legal standing, that's talking about someone who is able to bring a case before the court. It's somebody who has been directly harmed. And this is important in the law because we don't want to have people bringing a case based on theory. In our court system, if someone is bringing a lawsuit, they have been harmed by an action. In some way, they have been impacted by a government action or by someone else's action. So they have a standing before the court. They have the right to be the person standing there. An example of this would be how we used to talk about McDonald's hot coffee. And now there's a warning label on coffee cups when you buy coffee through most drive-through venues. It'll warn you that the contents are hot. There was a lady who endured 3rd-degree burns on her thighs from getting coffee through a drive-through that spilled on her lap. She had standing before the court because she was harmed. She had actual harm caused by the hot coffee. Someone else that was going through the drive-thru and thought, gosh, this coffee is too hot, they shouldn't be able to serve it, with no damage, could not go before the court to sue. There had to be an actual injury. There had to be actual reason for that person to be the proper person before the court. So that's just kind of the thought process that you need to have when you're looking at these. Think about why it's important, why it is relevant to us today, and why it's something that'll be important for a paralegal to be able to understand all the way through, or for a law student to have that base understanding before going on to law school, where you're going to go into much greater detail on all these topics. Okay, jumping back to week 2. When we talk about sources of law, this is something that we cover in other courses. We cover it in legal research. So those of you, since this is a 300 level class, hopefully you've already had legal terminology, legal research and writing, and you've got some understanding of where we're going. In this class, when you're doing your written assignments, go back to the information that you learned in legal terminology. So like last week when you were writing about civil procedure and the process and you used a term like federal jurisdiction, that's something that's covered in legal terminology. So think back, what is a federal question? What gives the federal court the right to hear a case? And use those tools that you learned in those classes too, like the legal dictionary from Cornell Law School, where it's talking about a federal question jurisdiction. So remember that you're using these written assignments to show a culmination of your knowledge as we were working towards this class and using the content material in the course. So if you get to something, you're like, I know I should know more about this term, and you go to the law.cornell.edu and get the legal definition from their website. This is a great source for legal definitions that people use in the legal field on a regular basis. Make sure you cite to this. If you put something in there about federal question jurisdiction and you got information from here, cite to this in your work. But it's a really good way to show a full understanding of the material. Oh gosh, here we go. So, but remember, you also need to cite each week to the textbook. If you do not cite with in-text citations, including page numbers to the textbook, you will not get full credit on your assignments. So when you go to course materials, click on Barnes & Noble First Day, and you wait on it to open up the textbook. You hit Read Now. The very first thing that you can do once you get this open is in the top left corner, there are going to be 3 dots by the title name of the book. When you click on that, you're going to be able to get the textbook citation. So it's going to come up and you can click on it and it lets you choose by clicking the 3 dots, citation, and you pick MLA, APA, Harvard, or Vancouver. Harvard is what we use in the history department. That's the Travian. That's the first way to go. Make sure it is properly formatted and that you are actually doing what is needed. Don't just copy it and paste it just like this. Make sure that you do it with the correct information. If you're using MLA or APA, those are there for you as well. So that's one thing. Another thing that you can do is go to Read It Offline, or for your in-text citations, you're going to use the author's last name, comma. If you're using MLA, you're going to put the page number, and to find the page number, let me move this. It's going to be right down here in the bottom corner. So this week, if you think about your material for this week, you're going to be looking at the sources of law. So week 2 is looking at sources of law in chapters 3 and 4, and you're also going to use the appendix. So when you go into the textbook, you're going to go over here. Chapter 3 is sources of law cases. That's going to be the common law, things that came out of the court. Chapter 4 is legislation. Those are statutes and regulations that typically in a state, it's gone through the state Senate, or at the federal level, the Senate and the House, to create a law that's on the books. And a lot of administrative agencies like the Department of Education, Department of Homeland Security, Agriculture, just different ways that we have regulations that outline what is to be done. That's legislative law. And then the case law is the court-made law. So you'll open these up, and when you're reading through it, when you get to something, the terms are listed there, and you get to something that you want to cite. Let's just say we're going to use the sentence. You can, in fact, copy that sentence and paste it into your paper. When you do that, make sure that you are using quotations, that you're leading into the quote with information, and after the quote, you're using information to tie it in with your entire paper. And down in the bottom corner, you can see that this is on page 70. So that's how you can copy and paste from the textbook, get the page number for your citations, and understand where you are in the material. Another thing I wanted to show you, where we were at the beginning of that, and it had the whole list of terms. It tells you what's going to be covered in here. A lot of these terms are going to closely match the things that you are doing with your signature assignment. So you can use this to help you know where to be looking. It'll go all the way through the textbook. All of the terms are in your textbook that we're going to be using, so you should be able to use it. You can also use the key terms button to go down to them and click on that, and that'll take you to a good definition, including a page number. Remember, you cannot only copy and paste this into your signature assignment and be done. There must be independent thought. You've got to show your analysis, your rationale for why this is still important in the law. But this shows you how to get to some of that information in the textbook. Okay, going back to this week, when we are talking about using the law and the way our law is developed, one important aspect is how the Supreme Court justices view the law. There are different ways that they look at the Constitution. You've got textualist and originalist, the concept of a living Constitution, where we look at how the Founding Fathers meant the Constitution to identify certain things, consider other writings, and put all of the written information, all of those primary sources together to figure out the context of the time. So that's like the living Constitution. Originalism is looking at the Constitution, looking at the exact language that is used in the document, and only using that information to look at how it is going to be used. Textualism is looking at it at the text, how it is written, and interpret it reasonably. Not being so strict to use just the dictionary definition at the time it was written for each word, but look at a reasonable person's interpretation of the meaning. I've got a video here that goes to the Supreme Court confirmation for Amy Coney Barrett, and she's being questioned by Senator Sass about how the constitutional interpretation is being used today and how those of us in the legal field are looking at using the Constitution in today's society. One example of this would be unreasonable search and seizure. Most people at the time that it was written thought about that as someone going into their home, that it was an issue of your home being searched. And that is logical. We all think of that too, that someone can't just barge into your home without a warrant to search it. What about a cell phone? How does unreasonable search apply to a cell phone? What if your cell phone is locked? What if your company owns it? What if your parents own it? What if you share a plan with someone else? What if you're using the University of Cumberland's email on that cell phone? So what kind of search can we use that is constitutional in 2024 based on what was written in the late 1700s? So that's how these issues arise, how we're looking at them now. Another common one is the Second Amendment. So that's why that video is there, is to kind of show you how a Supreme Court justice is looking at this. You can find all of the confirmation hearings for the recent Supreme Court justices very easily on YouTube and look at them and hear how they talk about these issues. It's a really good way to hear how a justice considers the interpretation of the Constitution and the law, and how they are thoughtful in their speech. They're slow to speak. They think through what they are saying in a very different way that you can contrast with that of a politician who is running for office and has constituents that they're trying to speak to and engage and get their message out. It's two very different ways of speaking and thinking that helps those of us in the legal community differentiate the roles and what is being done. So that's why I use those. We've got another link to Masterpiece Cake Shop. And then this is a link to 100 cases everyone should know. It's a really great compilation of little vignettes on each case that give you an introduction to them. The Craig v. Boren case is a really important case for understanding how someone who is legally savvy works through changing the Constitution. This is a big process. You need to get everyone on board. You need to make sure that the issue is relevant and understood by all the parties. And the Craig v. Boren case is one of the most impactful and easiest to teach students how it happened, because there's a twist in this case that most people don't think about before they review the case. So the first link is to an NPR podcast that you can listen to. The second link is to the case directly, to where you can see the oral arguments, you can see the court opinion, and some supplemental information. This is directly from the Supreme Court. It's an excellent resource for you all to use in all cases. And I just included this in here so that you all would have this link. If you wanted to go to YouTube and learn more about the Supreme Court cases on your own time, this is a great way to just get familiar with some of the cases you may hear in practice or in law school. All of that said, to lead to this week's assignment. Remember, in order to get a passing grade on the assignment, you must cite to the textbook, including in-text citations, where you get the material from the textbook. That includes a page number. You may not cite anything at the end of your paper that you do not have an in-text citation for in the body of the paper. You need to answer the questions at the bottom. You can divide that up. It's a 500 to 750 word paper, so you could do about 125 to 175 words per prompt. That'll give you an idea of how to break it down. Some of these you might get really engaged with. You want to write more than others, but you always need to make sure you fully answer all of the questions. Another point on last week's, remember to use academic writing and academic format. Your assignment tells you that it needs to be an MLA document, Times New Roman 12, 1-inch margins, using an academic citation system consistently throughout your paper, and that it answers all of the questions. If you do not cite the material from the textbook, I cannot verify that it is your own writing that is based on the material that we are providing for you. You will not get a passing grade. And it needs to be more than one citation. You need to cite when you're going through all of the questions, show where you went into the textbook or to these materials to get your information. I made a lot of comments on last week's papers. Please go through those and look at the comments that I made to see if you can understand it. I put in some information like how to work on citing or putting something in hanging indent at the bottom for your reference list. I put in formatting issues, a lot of things about focusing on writing in the third person, using an academic voice, treating this as an academic paper rather than something like a blog post or a reflection, because this is academic writing. So hopefully you all have seen your papers and you've looked through the comments. If you've got any questions, don't hesitate to email me. If you've got any other questions, please email me and I will answer those for you individually and for the entire class next week. Have a great week.